Hello,
Hey,
I'm Alex,
I'm Val.
and we're going to talk about Kennedy and Heidi. And this is my favorite episode of Sopranos. And it's, I remember the last time I watched this on the last viewing, I think I immediately went back and watched it again because I feel like there's just so much to get out of this episode. And in some ways, I feel like it might even be the most important episode of the whole series for me because I think it's kind of where potentially with one reading, Tony is where he figures out who he is and where he kind of reaches his ultimate point as a character throughout the course of the whole show. And obviously we have the end of Christopher, which is
Really sad.
Really sad. Very surprising. Thank you. Very sad. Surprising upon first viewing. Also a little bit confusing if I can remember back to seeing the show for the first time or times. It seems to kind of come out of nowhere, but then I also feel like there's all these clues throughout season 6B that are kind of leading us to this point. And we also get clues into Tony's subconscious and what he's thinking about, and maybe some clues towards his rationalization for actually killing Christopher that are really interesting. And I think when you actually think about it and analyze why he would have done that, it all really does fit together and does make a lot of sense. But when you watch this show the way you would watch a typical TV show where everything's kind of handed to you, it is a little bit confusing because it does kind of seem to come out of nowhere and we aren't given the reasons. We have to kind of work for it. And I think that's the best thing about this show. I think there was a lot of criticism over or a lot of confusion that maybe turned into criticism because people didn't like how it was treated, how Christopher dies seemingly out of nowhere. This major character, it seems like a plot device. It seems like something that would happen at the end of the show because it's cheap and exciting. Because since there's so few episodes left, getting rid of a main character doesn't have the same weight as it would have earlier because he would be gone anyway. But I think it's much bigger than that. I think, and it's something that I want to talk about maybe to start off with, is that aspect of this episode, because I think it's really pivotal for the whole series and understanding it on the whole. But the reason why Tony chooses to kill Christopher. Because I think it reveals a lot about who he is and kind of sets up this journey that is this episode for Tony. And I feel like this episode really is a journey for Tony from beginning to end that kind of brings him to a new place. The last thing we have is him saying, I get it. And I think that there's a lot there.
I think you're right.
You agree?
I agree.
That's good. Yeah, go for it.
No, you go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna go for it.
Your favorite episode.
It's my favorite episode.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I think there's probably multiple readings of what's going on. I think that there might be kind of an acceptance of Tony by the end of who he is and how he functions in the world, what his place is, and maybe not lying to himself anymore about the impact he has through his actions and the life that he lives. There is this development where we're coming out of an episode where Tony is on this losing streak of gambling, and by the end, after going on this kind of like spirit peyote adventure, he's winning every game of roulette. There's this focus. There's a couple of really key shots when he's going into the casino. There's this focus on the devil that I think is quite important. There's, for me, kind of Tony questioning for himself why he killed Christopher and what it means that he's gone, but at the same time kind of selfishly continuing his own kind of existential questioning of his existence. Everything kind of seems to focus on him. And there's something about, I think, that he maybe accepts the evil that he kind of perpetrates, this kind of like devil character, that he actually kind of embraces it and he goes into this kind of place and he actually starts to win. And there's this kind of idea of self-fulfillment. Like, he actually, once he embraces that, and once Christopher is gone, and perhaps Christopher in many ways was killed because of the negative impact that he had on Tony, the kind of detriment that he had to Tony's existence, be it the fact that he could have ratted him out to the FBI, like Tony says in the therapy session. The fact that he was embarrassing him through Cleaver, the fact that he was kind of showing his resentment towards Tony, the fact that it was the biggest blunder of his career, that he didn't turn out to be the reliable kind of right-hand person that he had envisioned. I think there's a lot there.
I don't know. I think, like, this is an important counterpart to, obviously, like, the Cosa Mesa adventure.
Definitely.
Because I think we even have, like, repeats of some questions, right? Like, he asks Christopher's friend, someone.
Who's Christopher's friend?
The woman that is Christopher's friend.
Oh,
that Tony
Christopher's friend. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I don't know if we know her name.
We might not know her name.
Probably in the credits.
Yeah.
But, yeah, he even says to her, like, why am I here? And she's kind of like, well, what do you mean? Is like, she's like, that's what this journey is for. That's what, like, the peyote's for, basically, right? And he's like, no, I mean Vegas. But those are the type of questions, like, who am I? Where am I going? Why am I here? That we got back in his coma, right? And so I think, like, for me, I don't know if it's necessarily, like, I do agree with you that it is this kind of, like, coming to terms with being evil and kind of, like, embracing it on one hand.
But I actually don't know if I feel that.
Okay, well, I just said that I don't think that it's this, so that's what I'm saying.
Good. Yeah.
But I think it's this, like this is where he's supposed to be. This is who he's supposed to be. And so, like, I don't know if it's necessarily like embracing, like, I'm an evil dude, but I think it's like, this is who I am. Like, this is me, Tony Soprano, and these are the things that I do
definitely
in this world. And, you know, like, seeing the beacon again in that, you know, sun flare or whatever, or that, you know, electric light on the ceiling, like, he's closer and closer to knowing who is he and where is he going. And this is kind of it. This is kind of like the pinnacle of it in some ways, right? Like, he's back to winning. He's back to himself. Right. Which is this, you know, shitty guy.
Right. And maybe even, like, more of an amped up shitty guy than he's ever been before.
Yeah. I mean, but he does say, like, I don't know, like, I think, like, that's a little bit false in some ways too, because, like, he does, like, multiple times this episode, like, in both the false Melfi session and the real Melfi session, he's like, I've murdered people, my cousin, Puss, right? Like, and then later on.
But this is different because this isn't particularly for a reason. Like, I think that it is, like, the next level, and I think that he only reaches this acceptance when he does choose to kill Christopher because it's different. Like, with Pussy, he was ratting him out. Like, that was the action that would lead towards. With Tony Blundetto, it was required to make peace with New York. Yeah. For this, it was very kind of indirect. It's very abstract. It's very ambiguous. And the fact that he maybe embraces that, chose to do it, and accepts it, and actually says he's dead, and realizes that he's winning from it, is the ultimate evolution of Tony's character, because it does go one step further.
But it's all how it serves Tony, right? Like, you even, like, you're kind of like, I mean, like, we become part of this world by watching this show, but, like, you know, you don't have to kill someone who's working with the FBI, right? Like, that's not like, you know, like, that's not like a must. You don't have to kill your cousin. Like, it's all to protect Tony and preserve his power and his money and his ability to, like, live this life that he's living, right? So it, like, and we see in this episode, like, Christopher's death is also all about him. And it's just, like, that much clearer, right?
Definitely.
Like, we don't question him killing Pussy, right? Like, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, we're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, of course he would kill his friend. Like, totally. Or, like, yeah, like, he definitely killed his cousin. Like, that makes sense. This one does feel like it's more like, well, what the fuck is he doing? But all of these things have always been all about Tony and all about like getting what he needs.
Totally.
Right.
Well,
so like
yeah.
it just kind of like solidifies again, like the show's genius is making us love this guy who is a bad guy. And we were kind of like fooled into it, right? You're kind of like, oh, that makes sense. Poor guy. He had to kill his cousin and his best friend.
Right.
And here we don't have that same level of like, I don't know, empathy or whatever anymore for him.
And I think that's the point, because I think it's escalated, like on all grounds. Like,
But what I'm saying is I don't think it has escalated.
I think it has. So that's an interesting point. But I think it has. Like, I think that I hear what you're saying, but it was less necessary to kill Christopher than those other people that were threatening him. It's still awful, but like it's always been awful.
Yeah.
And we should have recognized that from the first episode. It was very clear.
We're saying the same thing, but
disagree.
But disagreeing about it,
But
yeah.
also in terms of it all being about Tony, like you're right. Like these are things that have been happening the whole show, but it's becoming more and more egregious. So it's harder to kind of condone it. It's harder to kind of...
Again, I don't know what makes it more egregious. It's just like it all depends on your point
becomes
of view.
more obvious.
So yeah, sure. That's sure. Definitely. The show doesn't give you these reasons to like be empathetic, like I was saying.
Right.
But like if you think about it, right, okay, like his reasons for killing Christopher, even though he doesn't say them that way, right? Like it all does come back to him. Like he was legitimately like worried for how his child was going to grow up or die in a car crash with.
He maybe. That might be a convenient
I don't know,
excuse.
like
it might just be
I don't know.
him.
The focus on the car seat for me, like, is this kind of...
But maybe he recognizes that as a possible manipulation to get people...
Yeah, I mean,
that's
possible.
He does keep on bringing it up, right?
Like,
even to the person he's sitting next to in the funeral. And, like, I think it's because he recognizes how strong that is as a symbol of Christopher needed to die. Because other people could recognize that it's about this baby. That is... We can be more empathetic towards that than the way that it would impact Tony, which I think... in many ways is the only reason why he actually was concerned about Christopher continuing to live.
Well, I think, like, again, that's, I think, the point. It plays with our notions of, like, when is something justified and when isn't it? And why has he been doing these things all along, right? Like I said, like, there isn't a justification. And you can justify it and say, like, I had this dream that Pussy was working with the FBI. But that's, like, as ridiculous.
Right. But I mean, I guess he was right. By the time they killed him,
maybe he was right to kill Christopher. I don't know. Like, if you want to play it that way, like, maybe he was right that,
it isn't
that
as
the,
immediate.
the kid would have died.
Direct. Right.
I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm saying, like, that's what I think the show is, like, helping us to play with.
Yeah. I think it has escalated, because even in the way that it's all about. We're agreeing.
Okay, you agree. It's escalated.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay. What we're seeing, too, with Tony as a narcissist, too, is just so extreme at this point. And I think that it is about this, like, character evolution. And I think that's something that's really important that happens in this episode, because in some ways I feel like this is the zenith of the whole show. Like he reaches his ultimate state.
Yes.
But he's completely unable to show...
Is it zenith or zenith? I don't know.
Maybe that depends where you're from.
I'm not sure. Okay, cool.
The thing that actually frustrates him and makes him want to leave New Jersey is being unable to empathize with these people who are hurting bad, as he says. And it's actually more of seemingly an annoyance than anything else. Which is all about him. There's really nothing that has to do with Christopher, the loss, what it means to other people.
Annoyed. Yeah.
He's basically just annoyed.
Yeah.
Because he's completely incapable of feeling anything.
Yeah. Although Christopher's friend, again, unclear. I don't know her name.
Tony's friend now too.
Also Tony's friend. She identifies, like, she's like, Christopher used to come and tell me some sad stuff, but, like, you look actually sad.
Yeah.
Right? And so the fact that, like, he, like, can't feel these real emotions, but clearly there's, like, something very deep and disturbing going on inside him.
Right.
That he covers up is, is part of the problem. The other death that is brought up in this episode is, of course, Adriana, right? They talk about that, right? And again, like, we have this justification about why Tony would have had to do that, right? Even, is it in the Melfi session he's talking about it also? He's talking about like, I was with he was like, I was with Christopher through his hardest struggle or something like that. I think I wrote it down somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, I can't
struggle.
find it. His greatest struggle. I can't really find it in my notes. And then, and again, like, that was to protect Tony. That wasn't for anything else.
Right.
Right. And he's the one who, like, I guess he didn't cause Christopher's greatest struggle, or whoever it was put. Adriana working with the feds, quote unquote, caused it.
Right.
But, again, we have this justification for something unjustifiable.
Right.
I don't know.
Totally. I think that in the end, for me, there's also something about that last moment, him seeing the sun flare, which obviously is a reference to the beacon. There's another reference of the car passing by after Christopher dies, obviously linking us to Costa Mesa, linking us to the Eiffel Tower for Carmela. These questions of existence,
Why
life,
am I here?
afterlife, why am I here? And there's something just about, I think, Tony, what seems to be happiness in his acceptance of this, him being on top, Christopher being dead, maybe him realizing why he's there is just for self-fulfillment. Because as he receives these material rewards of these chips and just betting and having his friend killed and killing his friend for his own purposes, in some ways that is his reason for being there, and he gets it and he accepts it.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, I was talking about it very poorly at the beginning, but like that focus on actually, like, the devil, this, like, clear shot on the devil, also Pompeii in some ways, like this, there's just, like, there's some interesting imagery that's happening there. But it is, I think there's something about, in the end, like, him getting who he is, what his impact is in some ways, or maybe not even caring about his impact, just getting that he's there for himself and that he's out for self-fulfillment.
And it's interesting, like, often throughout this show, of course, we deal with Tony in therapy too, right? And, like, what's the point of therapy? Usually it is this, like, self-discovery of who am I and why am I here, right? But Tony doesn't get that from therapy. He gets it from, this peyote trip, but, like, from living this life where he can, where he realizes that, like, to be on top, he is his true self, which is someone who, like, doesn't, like, is annoyed by other people's pain. Right. And, and that's not, like, a socially acceptable thing. Killing people is also not socially acceptable.
Right.
But, like, this is who he is, and, like, and now, like, he kind of, like, gets it. Like, he gets why he's here, right?
Yeah.
It's not, like, a really positive. It's not, like, an outcome that we'd like to see of someone in therapy, right? Like, yeah, I get why I'm here. It's, like, to be this terrible person and do terrible things.
Right.
But that's how I end up on top, and that's, like, for me, that's
right. And
beneficial.
That's what's important.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, it's been laid out for us pretty clearly from the very beginning of the show who Tony Soprano is, and we've had to wrestle with coming to grips with him as a bad person. And I think that many viewers, you empathize with him because he's, like, the original anti-hero of TV. And it's, for some reason, difficult to see him in this negative light, even though it's laid out so clearly for us. And we have to kind of come to this realization of getting it, of what he really is, and the impact he has on others. And I think that last scene is the moment where Tony gets there for himself. Which I think is really pivotal, because he's lying to himself for the whole series up until that point.
Yep.
There is a certain degree of acceptance, and I think that therapy, it's interesting to think about maybe how it led him there or it didn't lead him there, because in many ways I feel like therapy basically was a way for him to hone his manipulations.
Yeah. But again, I think we mentioned this actually last episode. I forget exactly in what context we were talking about it, but, like, therapy is narcissistic, right? Like therapy is all about Tony.
Right.
That's like, you know, like you really don't go to therapy. I think I even said this last episode or whenever we did this. Like that was also all about him. He just wasn't able to, like he was able to in his dream, to actually talk about the real shit that he does, to actually talk about himself, right? Like in his dream, he was able to say like, I've murdered people, my best friend, my cousin, whatever, right? Friends and family, or however he says it. Like that's not going to work for Tony, right? He can't be honest when he's out there on peyote and he is like his true mob self. He's at least honest about it.
Right.
Like that's who he is.
Well, and there's also that aspect of when he's talking about that in his dream, saying, I've murdered relatives, friends before, but this, and then we cut out of it. Mm-hmm. And it's, for me, the implication is that he feels nothing from this. That was kind of how I interpreted it. Because he's saying, like, I've murdered friends and relatives, and it's been difficult, but this, like, I don't feel anything. Like, it's become easier. Like, as time has gone on, he's accepted that part of himself. And we cut away, so you can't definitively say that. But that was my interpretation of it.
Yeah.
There's also something that I think is really important to think about that I was only kind of thinking about, and is kind of like a new reading of this season for me as of this viewing, is there's this funny thing that's going on in 6B up until this point with multiple instances where we're led to believe that Tony actually might kill one of his friends. We're led to believe that he might kill Bobby Bacala after Bobby hits him and beats him in a fight. And we're also led to believe that he's going to kill Polly for his loose lips and when he takes him out on the boat.
Yeah.
And there's kind of, like there's an increasing sense of like meaninglessness to why he would kill somebody.
Yeah.
So he ultimately acts on it with Christopher. But I think that's one of the things where upon first viewings, Christopher seems to come out of nowhere, but it's actually the third instance where we're teased with this idea of him killing somebody that we've come to love in this inner circle. And I think that that's also really relevant because I think Tony is increasingly out of control or maybe in control, because I think that the central question here is this idea of control. And I think that another plot point that happens recently is this idea of Tony struggling with gambling, and it's something that seemingly kind of came out of nowhere and people criticized. But I think that Tony is actually trying to maybe take himself out of his existence because he's bored kind of with the status quo, and he's trying to lose control in some ways. Like I think he's actively gambling to lose control because he is in control of his basic existence, but it's not answering any of his life questions. It's not affirming why he's here.
Yeah. Well, ever since his coma, right, he's been like seeing him sleep with Christopher's friend in this episode is, I think, maybe like one of the first times we actually see him having sex with someone after he told Carmela he's not going to do that anymore. Right? We've
seen with the stripper in the car, and he's suggesting it at the Bada Bing.
Yes, but that one doesn't go through. Like, we haven't really seen that since Costa Mesa.
There's also the fact that it's Christopher's friend, so it's
totally,
whatever. So,
and we know like
there's that aspect
Adriana
of Adriana,
thing,
exactly. So it's actually like acting on that thing that didn't happen, actually like engaging in that behavior.
Yes,
that didn't actually happen. People thought of, but now he's actually like owning it and doing it.
Yeah,
after Christopher died,
and with Juliana.
Skiffle.
Coming back this episode too, right? We're also reminded of that, like the ways in which Tony was, I don't know, jealous or I don't know, like just controlling, like kind of just like consuming everyone around him and everyone who he encounters, and taking things for himself.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that aspect of control is important, though, because Tony is choosing to get rid of Christopher. Mm-hmm. Tony is also in a position, too, interestingly, where he is out of control more than he has been at other times. And he is kind of like putting on this front because Phil Leotardo is clearly in the driver's seat right now in this skirmish that they have. That's kind of playing out in the background. Even one of the last scenes, it's Tony saying, "This is me hanging up," and then immediately after Phil hangs up. So we've talked about the kind of like dogma film style when Tony went to go meet Phil. Just generally in this asbestos argument that they're having, Tony is completely out of control.
Yeah.
And so maybe he's asserting himself in these ways to feel like he is in control in other ways of his life, be it gambling, be it murdering Christopher. He's trying to give himself power because he's in a position of powerlessness.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important dimension to what's happening throughout season 6B.
Well, I think like, and like, you know, even like regarding the asbestos, right? Like it's like at the end, once he's like, you know, whatever, like come to terms with who he is kind of thing, he makes the call. I mean, I imagine he makes the call anyways. I don't, you know, to dump the asbestos into the river, right? Which is like a shitty thing to do.
Like beyond shitty.
Like it's already shitty to like poorly dispose of asbestos, but like, you know, like he makes that choice like to just like not even give a fuck. Like not a single fuck. And you hear those ducks in the background, right? Like, and they're kind of like, you know, like it's reminding you of, you know, again, like we've seen ducks associated with like his family and these, you know,
well, he's
ties.
killing this family of ducks that could be, you know, like related to other people's family because there's all these instances of the asbestos clearly having impacts on others.
That kid eating his food.
Yeah, the first thing we have is the kid saying, "What's that?" And then he's told that he's basically eating the asbestos. So there's also like while the asbestos is being stored, we can see in the background it's at East Haladin Middle School. But there's this
and there's this dust like flying off of it. Right?
But it ties into the themes that we've been talking about because throughout the episode, Tony's completely only concerned with the asbestos as a matter of a power play and how it affects him and how it affects him financially and the 25% and what it would mean to stand up to Phil and what it would mean to accept his original offer. But there's no thought about how it impacts other people, which completely ties into Tony as this like incredible narcissist who is completely unempathetic and is just concerned about himself.
Yeah.
I think too, like this aspect of control, the last thing is there's this...
The last thing?
Well, just like on that theme, because I think there is this kind of reading of what's going on that's a little bit different. There's also the song playing as Christopher and Tony drive off the road, playing, which is Comfortably Numb, which also was being sung by Christopher recently. And
by
it was
Tony.
By Tony. And something that we talked about, like this comfortably numb state that the characters are all in. I think, and then we also talked about like AJ kind of like flipping through the channels, kind of like what he was viewing, how he was kind of in this malaise, kind of numb in his existence, something that Tony has definitely had throughout his existence that we've seen in the show. And it's relevant that that song is referenced multiple times and comes back at this extremely key moment. I think that...
On the Departed soundtrack.
I think that Tony is comfortably numb in his existence. And there is that like that aspect of him breaking out of that by trying to take control, but be it killing Christopher, like by diverting things, by getting rid of him, or like this gambling thing as well. Like I think that in some ways is where it's coming from. Like that's him just trying to deal with his existence. He's not answering the big questions at that point that he's been wrestling with throughout the entire series and that we should be wrestling with if we've been viewing the show kind of underneath the surface. But I think that dimension of control is really relevant to him just trying to break out of this meaningless life, this big nothing that we've been kind of talking about for the entire series.
Right. We have like when he and Christopher are in the car, right? Like before the accident, they're having this discussion, right? Like they're talking about how like each day's a gift and like both of them feel
Stop
that
and
way.
Smell the roses.
Right. Phil's not on that page, right? So like I feel like Christopher is kind of like like it's like this, like we're alike, like you and I are alike, and we feel things. And like throughout this whole episode, like Tony's like, you know, people are asking him how he's doing, like imagining that he's feeling sad like them, and they can't really see yet. Like us, kind of, we've been a little bit like blind to it, right? Like the other characters in the show also can't really believe that he's actually this terrible guy. They think he is sad about Christopher's death. Right. They don't think that he might have killed him. Right? They like believe this story, right?
Well, there's also like for me like the complete evolution of Tony as a manipulator too, and thinking about therapy as a tool to kind of sharpen his instincts of manipulation. Like this is his like greatest achievement, is basically knowing that he can get away with killing Christopher and nobody will know because he just plays it perfectly.
Right.
Even when he's meeting with everyone, you know, he talks about the official cause of death was asphyxiation. They're going to do a blood test for drugs, knowing that he will register positive for drugs. So he's kind of like shifting the focus in a way that will protect himself.
Yeah.
And actually in those moments too, he's talking about like how he bumped his knee, the one from high school. So it's all about him. Like it is, he deals with this tragedy in terms that only are impacting himself.
I wrote down the knee thing too. And I don't know. I can't quite piece it together with, like, for example, like the test stream. Here's that test stream. When does it when he has the dream about his high school?
Yeah, and he goes down into the basement and talks to his coach.
Like I can't quite tie together kind of like the development of this episode, because like there is something about this knee injury, right? Like, and that was like in high school.
Yeah.
And with football, having this knee injury that kind of like changed the trajectory of his life, right? So this knee and like this like re-injury of that high school injury is something like, it's this kind of like demarcation of a turn of some sort. I don't know, I can't quite, like I said, I can't quite piece it together, but I put a little star beside it because I felt like that was, I mean, that's obviously purposely calling our attention back to what we know about Tony before he was Tony Soprano, when he was in high school, when he had this kind of like other potential, you know, patio salesman kind of life.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, exactly. Like maybe it's like a further retreat from that. Like it's like this next inevitable
like
change to or like injury to that possible development for Tony Soprano as a better person. It's also just kind of bookending the whole show. Like I'm hearing in my head the voiceover in episode 1 in the pilot where he's talking about how Junior's talking about him never being a varsity athlete was a terrible blow to his self-esteem. We are just kind of linking things back to Tony Soprano as the protagonist of this show, as our main focal point, dealing with his concerns, dealing with his dreams, and how ultimately that's all that really matters when we're kind of viewing things through his eyes.
There's also something in this episode for me that there's like a lot of characters that we've never seen before too, and I'm not going to be able to like be eloquent enough about this, but like there's just it's noticeable, and so it just like feels important that like there's this, like when he's lying in his room after the injury, there's like a guy in there who we've never seen before, the one who keeps bringing up Carlos coming or whatever, like is Carlos on his way up or whatever, like we don't know who that guy is. There's this guy who like nods to Tony at the funeral when Carmela's about to go up and see Christopher.
Those might be people, and we're just like upon coming and talking immediately after missing something.
I mean, that's some also
deep Sopranos trivia.
I mean, definitely, and like that's not the stuff that like I pay attention to be really honest with you. But like,
they're not.
But that one, like
the
scene of like this guy nodding to Tony at the funeral, like that's not someone we're familiar with. So like for me, that like there is something. It's like it shows us kind of like how, I don't know, like how Tony, I don't know, like
for
Tony's lack of like caring for, like nobody's important to Tony,
exactly, like
right?
how
like,
peripheral all these people around Tony are.
Yeah, and same with like, you know, him calling Alan, the guy in Vegas, right? Like he knows this guy Alan who has rooms on a plane. Like I don't know, like even like, Kennedy and Heidi, who the episode's named after.
Exactly. Yeah, those are obviously new characters.
Sure, but it's like it's also just like these really peripheral characters who are, we can imagine or we know how they're impacted by Tony Soprano.
Right.
I don't know. There's something I can't quite figure it out. The 3 to 5, 7 to 9 woman who never misses a wake. I don't know.
A lot of you were bringing up something interesting that I won't take from you, but I liked it. Would you like to fill me in on your interesting perception?
Well, I just think that I like this episode a lot, I think, because it's a very Lynchian episode. I think there's a lot we have a lot of driving scenes looking at the road. We have these the light when he's looking up at the light. Thank you for just saying
I just really like
things.
David Lynch. So.
Yes. Even kind of the silliness of the drug induced kind of when Tony's rolling on the floor laughing, there's just something, and we get the close-ups of the dealer. I don't know. Is it a dealer in roulette?
Great question.
The
guy,
staff member who
that's correct. That's
and he
safe.
kind of has this very deadpan face, and Tony's laughing hysterically and rolling on the floor. And then I feel I don't know, that this character of 3 to 5, 7 to 9,
I feel
it just
it was
feels
Twin Peaks,
a
maybe the 3rd season, but I can't remember.
Yeah,
for sure.
there's these characters with names like that are
maybe it was one of the movies. Anyway, but yeah, somebody who only shows up in the credits and is listed as 5 to 7 or something.
Yeah. Anyways, I can't remember. Yeah. And same with kind of these random characters. Or even Kelly showing up kind of looking like Tony comments it's like in the movies. She's like Jackie Kennedy.
Right.
These kind of I don't know, over dramatic or something like that moments. Anyways, that's why I like this episode.
Yeah. Me too.
Well, lots of reasons.
Staying on the
but the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about, just as we're talking about Tony, because this whole shift towards him having been losing at gambling, right, quite significantly in past episodes, he still is losing at roulette after Christopher dies, right?
when he gets to Vegas, we have focus on roulette, and Tony is losing. He's losing all his
He's
hands
still losing, and he seems to kind of be it doesn't really bother him. He's also kind of numb to that in that scenario. He's kind of just huh.
But there's a change that happens after that. That's interesting. And I think in some ways maybe that's him getting with Christopher's friend. It is him acting on these worse impulses.
Right.
It's only after we revisit the casino and we have that focus on the devil that comes up as this close-up and shows importance that things actually have changed. And it's linked to that scene of him getting it. So I think there is this transformation for him, and that's why he starts to win.
Yeah.
But I think that is very relevant. Yeah.
There's also this transformation of AJ in this episode, but he kind of comes to a different place, right?
Yeah.
So we see that AJ now has been hanging with the Jasons, although also in therapy and taking medication.
Right.
And, in our first scene, we have him with his therapist. We have him kind of being excited about classes and being, talking about the Israeli-Palestine conflict. And, again, we see his life isn't all just roses, right? He's definitely up to some bad shit with the Jasons and laughing about people's toes getting burnt off with acid.
Right.
But then he comes after he sees,
right,
that the man on the bike getting beaten by the Jasons. By Jasons. He makes this complete shift back to who we really know AJ to be also, right?
That's an interesting scene.
And he says people walk around this is all something. Right.
And reverting to that nihilism.
And you'd have to be nuts not to be depressed, right? You'd have to have your head
so far up your ass you'd only see yourself, which I think is really relevant, because that idea of you would have to only see yourself as how you could deal with this insanity, which is happening after he's found himself in a situation that was set up by his dad. I think that's what's really interesting.
Yeah.
His dad put him down this path by getting the Jasons to befriend AJ.
To invite him, yeah.
And he is entering the domain of Tony. He's basically fulfilling the kind of inevitability of reliving Tony's life by getting involved with these gangsters.
Totally.
And once he sees these things, he's saying the only way you could live with this is by being such a narcissist that you can only see yourself, which is exactly what Tony is.
Yeah.
I think
and
that's really...
and lots of characters are like that.
Yeah, I mean, almost all of them, basically.
Yeah.
And AJ is complicated in this interesting way, and I think that that's something that he doesn't get credit for on early viewings, at least for myself and from people I've talked to. Like, he comes across as this kind of brat, but he's actually maybe one of the only characters who struggles with these questions.
Right.
And
who doesn't just,
possibly,
embrace the narcissism.
Maybe actually there is this positive landing to he could break out of it.
Whereas Meadow, on the other hand...
She's going to be a doctor now.
But, she's, she has blinders on, and she's, pretty full.
Well, we'll see where she ends up
full of
very
herself.
soon. Actually, interestingly, another parallel, I mentioned this, but AJ switching the stations in this season just earlier, and this kind of malaise and this question of existence and not being able to focus on anything. That's exactly what Christopher's doing right before he dies.
Right, he's
flipping through the stations before they get to comfortably numb.
Yeah.
And I think that, and check it out, that's huge, because that's that's what Tony was singing as he comes down the stairs.
Yeah.
And we have those, it's in that episode. We have those scenes with AJ flipping, we have Christopher flipping, that comfortably numb. For something to be revisited twice, I think is very relevant.
Yeah.
And there is that aspect of just kind of flipping through the channels, not being able to focus, not being settled, not being confident in what you are, what you want.
Yeah. Well, we have seen, we've seen AJ and Christopher obviously being compared in past episodes, if not the whole show, basically, right? This reference to being like a son, AJ being his actual son, Christopher kind of being like his mob son, right? The only difference being Christopher being that much older had fewer options, like AJ kind of has, right? Fewer options kind of to escape that,
right?
And so we kind of see the two sides of the coin. We see two people who do feel very deeply and how they kind of cope with it within their situations, one of them being not not in the mob, and one of them being in the mob.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No, absolutely. What do you make of the title Kennedy and Heidi, and these two bit characters who we have, Kennedy and Heidi, showing up?
What do you make of it?
Well, let me tell you. I think it plays into this theme in the episode of the impact that people have by not doing the right thing, by looking out for themselves. Ultimately, Kennedy and Heidi are in some ways responsible for this whole kind of line of events that happen.
Kennedy
is it? I thought it was Heidi was on her learner's permit.
Oh.
Maybe, I don't know.
I forget.
Anyway, Christopher was high, so he's responsible.
Yeah.
But if they had gone and checked, would things turn out differently, right? That would be the right thing to do. But I think it's Heidi, you think it's Kennedy, is looking out for herself because she's on her learner's permit after dark. There's this small impact that the right action would have on yourself that people don't do because it's hard.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's happening throughout the whole show. That's ultimately who Tony is. In some ways, it almost leads into Tony's big I get it moment, his realization about who and what he is. It's this small role, but it's that philosophy that guides everybody in Sopranos.
Sure.
World.
Well, everybody really in the world. I mean, it's just it's very human to look out for yourself.
But the impact is huge.
The impact is huge.
I mean, you have the first scene as this asbestos, this kid eating it, not even knowing what it is. You're impacting people that don't even know that they're being impacted, and you wouldn't know that you're impacting.
I think there's also and I don't quite know how this fits, but we also have references to with AJ and Christopher in particular, these material things, right? So there's that kind of there's this scene where AJ is in this English class, which
happens very quickly.
I used to teach university, and you definitely know in that class that one of the people in there was not one of your students. I'm not sure how she did not notice that he's not on her roster, but
I didn't even think about that.
But they're talking about like I forget exactly what's said, but it's like, you know, I should have written down the whole quote. Like, what is it like? It's something about the material world, like why this criticism of the material world, and then like I think it's maybe the next scene or like, you know, quite close afterwards, when Tony's with Christopher's friend that I really wish I knew her name. She's saying like, you know, it's not great, like maybe it's not good that he left her, but at least he left something, right? So it's kind of this like what do you leave behind when you die, right? Like what is there? And I think Christopher and AJ both think about those things. I don't think like Tony really thinks about like, once he's gone, he's gone. He's a narcissist, right? Like, and it's like, you know, like the world will fail to exist without him there, which is interesting in terms of, you know, some things that go on in the show.
That could happen.
That might happen in the show, but like, you know, this like, that like not all characters are like that anyways.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, absolutely.
Again, it's like, find this like with doing this podcast that's really challenging is like it takes me a lot longer to kind of digest information and be able to be eloquent, so
it's hard.
Hopefully those of you who listen to this know
that
are maybe like, even though I can't quite say things eloquently, maybe it's giving you some ideas to think about or you can come up with something, and please let me know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're just two people just talking about Sopranos after it's over. So, yeah, it's a good challenge, but we enjoy it.
There's lots there.
There's all these kind of moments that I think are rather pivotal that come up. What about Tony saying to Carmela, "When I said he's dead, I picked up relief"?
Well, I think Tony's looking for other people to feel like him.
Exactly.
Right? Like he's like
finding
looking. I see. It's funny. Like when I ask questions, I actually like mean it like a question. When you ask questions, I think it's just so you can tell me what you think. So.
No, I want to know what you think, but you just said what I thought, so it worked out.
Like he's talking about like he has to like put on this long face and say the platitudes, and he really doesn't feel anything, right? And he's looking for someone else to kind of like be like him, and even Carmela, who, you know, isn't the greatest character, you know, most moral character, you know, we see her and we see Kelly, you know, scream when they find out that Christopher's dead, and have these like very visceral, and Christopher's mom, and, you know, like we see this way that things really impact them. Even Christopher's friend.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even like coming out of, even like Christopher's mom like going to drink is more real than what Tony has. And Tony is kind of playing it off like we've come out of this dream where we actually have this very useful window into what he's actually feeling. Did I say Tony?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's right. I got scared. I said something different. But, you know, saying this pain I'm not used to. He died in my arms. And then saying, actually, it's a relief. And having all these pragmatic reasons. Like, it's a drag on his emotions. He could dime him out to the FBI. It's the biggest blunder.
It was the biggest blunder of his career,
He's covering... Like, it is this false narrative that he cares, and that it is painful, and it is interesting to like see him kind of pin that on Carmela, which is just like completely false. Like that is Tony, and that is Tony's issue. I do think also like Christopher clearly is high when he's driving. I think like it's not stated, but from
why is he looking at his watch? That's what I like because when they're at the meeting,
maybe he's trying to see if it's 3:00.
Maybe it is. Like when they're standing there by the Statue of Liberty, unknown where exactly, perhaps on the New York City side,
South Street Seaport, maybe, or by Battery Park.
It feels like they're on the Battery Park side, but they could be like on a Jersey side of it too. It's unclear.
Could be, right?
I don't know why
It does kind of look like that at Battery Park.
It
I was
does.
just there the other day. Yeah. Looked like that.
But he's looking at his watch a lot during that, and so you're like that threw me off a little bit because like I don't know like what like okay like say he like wanted to do drugs. I don't know like it doesn't
Better make
feel,
sure it's time to do drugs.
yeah, like it doesn't feel there's something about that.
Well, there
that,
is. I mean, this focus on death happening at certain times
Yeah.
too, and this 3 o'clock thing that's
3 to
mentioned
5,
before.
7 to 9.
Yeah. Well, going way back with
I
the
know.
with the
The
dreams
dreams,
that
yeah.
Christopher had, like could kind of like
Yeah.
play into the Sopranos mythology that's kind of been developed.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
That is a possible reading. I don't know if that's actually.
I don't know. I just can't quite figure out why he would be looking at the clock during that meeting.
I just think like for sure,
Otherwise.
and maybe we don't know. We'll never know. Who knows what he's going to? But I do think, even though it's not said explicitly, just
email
the way
Michael Imperioli and ask him.
I do think that, or maybe should email Matt Weiner and David Chase. Let's just email them. I'm sure they'll get back to
They'll
us.
get back to us.
But I think the way that Michael Imperioli is acting and the way that we see him and the way that his eyes look, like I think he definitely is high at that moment. So his character has also evolved to a point that seems rather hopeless.
Yeah.
And Tony recognizes it because there is
Yeah.
that moment where he looks at him and he sees him and he kind of pauses, and I think that he knows what's going on and that it's hopeless. And I think that also plays into why he kills him.
Yeah, and again, like we've started off this episode talking about, like, is that not as justifiable, or like not justifiable, but like in some ways that's like a less selfish way, like a less selfish reason to kill somebody,
Right.
to like almost like put someone out of their misery.
But is it about their misery, or is it about his misery?
Yeah.
Or is it about the kid's misery?
Yeah.
But I feel like it's not. I
know.
feel like it's an excuse. But that's my reading.
I know. No, I think like all are possible.
I think all readings are possible. I think
Yeah.
that's the beautiful thing. And ultimately, there's so much ambiguity in the show, you can never know.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
It's not about a reading. It's
No,
about
I know.
the fact that they all could exist.
Yep.
And that the answer isn't given to us. I
Yep.
think that's the important part. It's interesting how we have this dream sequence where Tony is in therapy, and then we have an actual sequence,
a
because
good
for
one.
me, that does give a lot of insight into Tony's character, to see what he's actually feeling and then how he acts in a identical situation.
Yeah.
So the disconnect between,
And it's actually like closer than it ever has been before in some ways too. Like
except the
he's,
emotions are completely different. He comes out with anger, right?
Yeah.
Like he basically says the same things, although protects himself. So we
Yeah.
can see how he basically
yeah, he's seen friends die before.
Yeah. But it comes out it's kind of covered up in anger.
I don't know though. Then he's like, you know, like I feel like I'm putting on this show, gotta have the long face and the platitudes, and
Right.
even
Gotta
though I
sit
don't
there with
feel
people
anything.
hurting bad.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like it's like some of the most honest we see him.
It is, actually. I agree. That concept of people are hurting bad and I feel like a hypocrite, which makes me mad at them. Mm-hmm. That's a really key
Yeah.
idea, and also shows just completely how he lacks empathy.
Yeah.
You're right. I think he is actually being very honest
Yeah.
at that moment. I think, the fact that he could be mad at others for their pain because
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't feel it is, I can't think of anything more narcissistic than that
Mm-hmm.
possible. And then the idea that he can't take it anymore, and the thing that he can't take is people's emotions.
Yeah.
And in
So
some
he
ways, I
just
think that
bails.
this is what he gets in the
Yeah.
end. He gets it.
Yeah.
Like that this is who he is, and that he doesn't exist on that kind of
Yeah.
plane, and that he accepts it, and that he actually wins when
Yeah.
he doesn't live like that.
Yeah. Well, I think like also like kind of like the underlying thing, and I was just thinking about this, is like I feel like I don't know, like we see him like when he makes the decision to call Alan and go to Vegas, he's like undressing.
Alan.
He has like
Like Alan's like our character. We don't know Christopher's friends.
no, I know,
We know
but
about
Alan.
He's a plane. They have shrimp cocktails.
That's like a sweet flight. I'd like to take that flight with that big
That would be
shrimp
great.
cocktail.
I would love to do that too.
But I gotta call Alan. But he's taking off like a dress shirt, and maybe it's directly after when he comes home from the wakes. But for me, like, and that's what I kind of think it is. I mean, at least like we don't really have a good sense of the timeline. But what it does show me is that he's skipped out on the funerals of Christopher and of Polly's mom, Polly's aunt. Like, he just bailed, you know, whereas, and again, like, not being able to deal with other people's emotions. Like, you have to imagine that those things are still going on without him back in Jersey.
Interesting. Right.
Because a wake is usually, like, before a funeral.
Oh, very interesting. I didn't think about that. I actually didn't. I thought
And
that
that
those were
would
kind of
be,
funerals.
and like, and
I
there's
didn't
this
realize the
focus on
difference,
like Carmela signing the funeral books at both places,
Right.
and like them being like that it was important that they were there for Polly, right? Like, he was like, well, we're here for you, you know, like, we're here for you, and same with,
and also that was Carmela's idea. He wasn't there for Polly. Carmela said, I think it's a good idea. It was basically.
But yeah, he like just totally bails
Right.
on those things. So, wow.
I did wonder, did they really have to schedule them at exactly the same time? Was that really
I know.
necessary?
I don't know. I don't know what the scheduling was like.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was some development actually. Like, once he is in Vegas, there was an interesting shot when he's sitting by the pool. There's kind of this
It's also a really short scene. Yeah.
really short scene, but I think maybe in some ways the purpose of the scene is there's this spinning shot that reminds me of the opening shot of College, where we spin around Tony and see both sides of his face, but this spinning shot is interrupted and edited before we see the other side of his face. So it actually only shows one side of his face. I think that he's become maybe less of a complex character as the show has gone on, and that he's also maybe embracing this kind of basicness and this kind of shallowness and lack of emotion and empathy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good read.
Even actually, like, where we end up when he goes into this devil scene and he's at the casino, we see him and Chris's girlfriend, CG, CF, Chris's friend,
yeah.
and we see them from behind wearing all black, and the dealers are wearing all white. Like, it's so strong, and it's something that I was going to say but I have mostly talked about for this whole show. Going back to, like, I think it was like season 2, there's some like very strong
I think it's even
examples of
that.
well, I mean, it's all over the place. I'm just thinking of the one where Artie decides with the soccer coach.
Yeah.
Basically, he says you can't do it. You can't kill him. You can't act violently. And there's these like white and black clothes and these ideas of like right and wrong, and also like many times reinforcing these ideas of like Tony seeing things in a black and white fashion. Like, that is a very deliberate choice to have those characters looking that way.
Yeah.
And there is maybe like also this aspect of Tony reverting to this kind of black and white viewpoint on everything, and that's where he ends, and that's what he gets, and that things are very basic, and it does stay in that kind of like, in here it's the 1950s, out there it's the you know, late 90s 2000s, like, you know, when this show is kind of basically creating this like timepiece of that time in America, but there is this kind of very basic black and white dimension to how Tony is seeing everything, and this very basic kind of animalistic, self-fulfilling part of who Tony is and has become at the end of the show.
Yeah, it's interesting, like that last scene. So on past viewings, I thought that he was saying, I did it.
I also thought that last time.
So that's, I don't know. I mean, that's not what the HBO subtitles say, but
no, he gets it.
He gets it. I also just, and so I don't know, like, you know, I don't really, I think I get it is probably correct.
I think so.
But I like how we end the episode with him opening his mouth to say something else, and it cuts off. Like, he like almost opens his mouth to say, I get it again, right? Like, he like stands
or
up
maybe
and he's
tell
like,
us what he gets,
right?
but
Or
to give us
yeah,
ambiguity.
Yeah, and I so I like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, he like opens his mouth just as the scene cuts to black.
But I think that like the fact that he says I get it after the solar flare, which is so clearly linked to the beacon, is Tony answering these questions of existence that he's been asking throughout the whole show.
Yeah.
I think that it is like him solving that puzzle.
Yeah.
Even if we can't.
Yeah.
Well, at least maybe we should just all do
like
peyote.
so like I would like to go to Vegas and do peyote.
Then we can solve all the questions of Sopranos. We'll know definitively.
Yeah. We will.
And life. Not even just Sopranos.
Yeah.
Existence. The cosmos. The solar system.
The solar system.
We'll know the rhythm of the solar system.
Yeah. That would be great.
Same principles.
Yeah. Has the same principles as roulette.
I mean, I think technically, if I learned anything today, it's that if we do it, we could probably make a lot of money on roulette. It seems like a good idea.
What do you think about 24, 20, 24? Black.
I probably have to do peyote to know the answer to that.
Yeah, me too. I think those are. I remember like maybe like 3 times ago watching this show and looking that up or thinking about it, and I think it is the ages of AJ and Meadow.
Oh, interesting. Is Meadow only 24? She seems so mature.
She's very mature for her age. I don't know. I don't know exactly. Like, I don't know what year Meadow was born in and what year we are now. But
yeah.
I mean, they're approximately that.
Right.
AJ's in grade 8 with his confirmation when Meadow's in her last year of high school. So.
Right. Right. There you go.
There you go. And we know that AJ is not yet 21.
Right.
So.
Good point. Other ideas?
I mean, I guess we'll see what Tony, if we can understand what Tony got based on his behavior in the next few episodes.
We might not find out on a weekly basis because our goal was to finish this before I have to leave for about a month. We're not gonna make it.
We're not gonna make it.
We're not gonna make it. If this keeps coming out, it's because we stockpiled them and managed to finish all the episodes before I go. But
within a week,
it's less than a week, I think.
Less than a week.
Or no, anyway, not long. It's not long. We don't have that many episodes left, but we're gonna try. But it just might not happen realistically. There's a lot going on. We're gonna try, but at the end of the day, this season is too good, and the end of the show has too much going on to speed it up or not give it the justice that it deserves. And I won't be able to record it for a while, so there might be a little bit of a break, just fair warning. But we are so close to the end, and before you know it, we'll be done. We'll be done our Sopranos podcast forever.
Crazy.
Unless you want to do it again from the beginning.
Thought about it.
Yeah. We could do it like at another time in our lives.
Well, I think like that's the thing is like this show is amazing.
Yeah.
Obviously, we love it more than any other show. I think I get something. I think I would have a completely different podcast.
Yeah, probably.
In some ways.
Yeah.
But maybe not.
I was thinking about maybe not watching TV after this for a while. Just giving up. Because I've realized that I don't like anything anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like watching TV ever.
Yeah.
But also, it's that age-old dilemma of watching The Sopranos and then having existential crises all the time because you're just dealing with this too much. So,
yeah.
Gotta chill. Gotta read a book.
Yeah.
Nice light book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Thanks for listening. This is my favorite episode, so.
It's Alex's favorite episode.
We will be back.
Christopher's my favorite character.
This
and
was
so
sad.
It's impossible for this to be my favorite episode.
Yeah.
Because it's
too sad.
It's too sad for me.
Well, we're gonna go eat all you can eat sushi now. We'll probably continue to talk about this. We won't record it though. So thank you for listening.
See ya.
We'll be back.